So why don't, to begin, how would each of you describe the thesis of your books? Barbara, we can start with you.
Well, let's see. I always feel like I should begin autobiographically or apologetically by saying that, you know, why is a woman who's been married for 40-some years interested in dating relationships? And the answer, the partial answer, is that I have two daughters who are part of the Gen X crowd, generation, cohort. And I first began to catch on to this notion of romantic discontent or even romantic despair among young, educated, 20-something women in the late 1990s, as my daughters and some of their peers were kind of crossing this important period of time from age 25 into their later 20s. And it seems that that was the time when women began to feel really anxious about their success in finding a good man to marry. And so I, at first, was very skeptical of this "there are no good men left." I guess maybe you'd call it a cultural meme, if that's the right way to use that word. Skeptical of that because, first of all, these young women were highly educated, smart, accomplished. They traveled all over the world. They had great jobs. They were successful in every way. So why, of all, and eminently marriageable. So why in all the world would such women be worried or nervous or anxious about their success in finding someone to marry? And the second thing is that according to all the evidence, these highly educated women will be successful in finding Mr. Right. So I actually wrote this book and came to my thesis, if you want to dignify it by that word, because I wanted to figure out what the, you know, what's going on here. And I guess one thing that would constitute the thesis is that I came to the conclusion after researching this and talking to women and looking at all the popular culture discussions of why there are no good men left, that we were seeing a big upheaval in the system of romantic courtship that had prevailed in Western society for centuries. And in its place was something that, for want of a better word, I called the relationship system. So we're moving from sort of romantic courtship with a clear destination to marriage to something called relationships. And just to cut to the chase, I would say that the differences between a romantic courtship system and a relationship system are very big as regards the level of social support, the intent of these two systems, and the outcomes. And so just to compare and contrast for a minute, in a romantic courtship system, the population that's involved in that is almost exclusively young, never married men and women. That's it. They're the ones that are, we have constructed a courtship system for. And the destination is marriage. That's what romantic courtship leads to. Whereas a relationship system includes just about anybody and everybody under the sun who is looking for a partner. So it could include young, old, middle-aged, never married, divorced, living together, and even married people looking for some action on the side. So, and the other thing is that with respect to a romantic courtship system, there's a series of very clearly defined steps, I call it the ladder of commitment, that leads people to ever stronger and more public expressions of commitment until they either decide to marry or not decide to marry. Whereas the relationship system is sort of this cycle of people moving in and out of relationships of varying levels of duration and commitment. So some of the young women that I eventually interviewed had been through 3 or 4 or 5 of these cyclical relationships with no clear destination in mind. So My book is sort of an exploration of that shift and of the consequences, primarily for women, but I agree with Kay on a lot of the consequences with respect to men as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just to clarify before, Kay, you talk about your book, so when you say courtship, you mean the path to marriage, not necessarily a specific, the norms of one specific era or a specific...
No, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. I mean that it still exists, by the way. It hasn't been displaced entirely, but it is less available as a clearly marked out series of norms, conventions that women and men too observe and follow in the process of determining who's the right person to marry. And they're very clear. And now we have a lot of confusion, particularly for marriage-minded women who find themselves in a relationships regime.
I should start by saying that really my book is in many ways just a footnote to Barbara's. She started it all, she figured it out, and I just observed a few additional ideas that I wanted to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about how I started to write this too. Like Barbara, I have children in this age group. My kids are a little bit younger, which is why I only got to the subject recently. But what I began to notice, number one, that my kids, as they reached their 20s, were having a very different kind of experience than I had had. In my 20s, I'd married at 21, which was a little young for my peer group, but not that young. They were taking much longer, of course, and I also noticed that women, I mean, these are all self-evident observations, and I'm sure most of you have observed this as well. The women were doing extremely well. I think I didn't know the data at the time, but by 1980, there were equal numbers of men and women graduating from college. Now it's about 57% women, and projections have it at around 60%. So I was noticing women were doing extremely well, not just that they were graduating from college more, but they just seemed more together. This was, they seemed, they figured out how to use those planners, they had those planners, and they not only had the planners, they knew how to use them. They figured out how to apply for junior year abroad, for instance. I don't know. Any of you are aware that the population of people, college kids who go abroad, it's largely women, and at least if you, this is only anecdotal, but a lot of people say, well, the guys just they can't get it together to make the application. So anyway, I noticed that. And the third thing that I began noticing was this strange thing happening in popular culture, the emergence of what I call the child man. There were the obvious examples, the Adam Sandler movies, the movies with people like Will Ferrell and more recently Seth Rogen, those Judd Apatow movies. So there's that, but as I started to look more deeply into it, I noticed that sometime in the early 90s, mid-90s, there had been an explosion of media targeting this age group, this young male demographic. And if you talk to marketers, they'll tell you they never could figure out how to reach these guys before. But something clicked in the early 90s. I think it had a lot to do with the change in the media environment, where you suddenly had all these cable stations, which made it possible to appeal to smaller niche groups. So suddenly we had Spike TV and ESPN 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't even know how far it goes. You have Comedy Central is largely male-oriented, though not only, of course. there was a certain kind of humor attached to this child man. It was the humor of the Animal House, you know, the frat boy kind of humor. It was a lot about babes and various bodily fluids. They seem to, I don't know what that's about, but that was very common. So I looked at that and I thought, well, what is that? It must have something to do with this later age of marriage, of later age of adulthood. And I wrote a little article, which, you know, was only a first step in my thinking about this, for the City Journal, which is where I did most of my writing, and I called it Child Man in the Promised Land. It was about the young men who were eagerly eating up this new media. I speculated that this had something to do with the delay in adulthood, and that men were being offered this opportunity to think of themselves as teenagers, as boys, and boy, they really liked it. So I published this article, and now City Journal is a small magazine, and some of you maybe haven't even heard of it, and I won't be offended, but I have to tell you, suddenly we were on the map once I published this article, because people were furious. I must have gotten, I don't know, about 500 emails from young men who were absolutely enraged, who said, here was what was interesting. They were mad at me because they felt I was being very anti-male. Okay, I understand that. But what was more interesting was that they were very mad at women in general. They said things like, it's not us, it's the women. Women are very entitled, they're gold diggers, they're bitchy, they're hypocritical, and they went on and on and on, and I thought, whoa, I don't know what this is about. And I started interviewing some of the guys. What I found was romantic disappointment on the male side, exactly what Barbara had seen on the female side. So that sort of started me to think a little bit more about this age group. Now, the book really is in many ways about this new stage of life that a lot of sociologists call emerging adulthood. I refer to it because I just think it's a little more accessible, pre-adulthood. And that is a period from about, it refers to really college-educated folks, so it's from about 21 through maybe mid-30s, early 30s, mid-30s, depends on the individual. The differences in the experience of pre-adults in terms of their thinking about their future, in terms of their figuring out what happens 2 years from now, 5 years from now, or whatever, that is really what I was so interested in. One of the main conclusions I reached was that this pre-adulthood has led to certain kinds of problems for men that are different than for women. I mean, it's problematic for both. Which, by the way, I should say, this is not an argument for going backwards. I'm not saying we should get rid of it. I'm just observing. So women have this clock in the back of their heads going, you know, tick-tock, tick-tock. And even if they haven't figured out yet at 25, let's say, whether they want to marry and have children, they know that decision has to be made. And it has to be made, let's say, by 30. For, you know, although some people wait a little bit longer. But, you know, there is the reality. Men don't have that same ticking clock. They don't have the same sense of projecting themselves into the future. And insofar as they do, it's way, way down the line. So, you know, I can't tell you the number of men who have said to me, since I've worked on this material, I'm a guy. You know, I'll wait till I'm 35 or 40. What's the difference? So men and women are on very different tracks during this period of pre-adulthood, and it's leading to a lot of this romantic disappointment.
One thing that I want to add on the women's side, not that we organize this as male, female, no. But one of the interesting things about the women was that they reached that sort of 25, 26, 27 age, and they were surprised that they had this sense of, well, it was in my game plan to get married at about this time. I'm ready. He's not. And I thought that this would unfold just naturally, that, you know, I'd reach this when I'd done all the other things I wanted to accomplish, and suddenly I'd be successful in finding. And one of my chapters I called Dating Mr. Not Ready, because the women would be ready. There was this, you know, I'm ready, and how do I find a man who shares my ambition to marry? But it was interesting to me that they somehow thought this was, they'd worked so hard in school, they'd hit every benchmark, they'd done AP courses, and there was no AP in getting married. Right. And they just, you know, like, how do you do that?
Right. Well, you know, one of the things that I'll just
go ahead and
do a little tag on that. One of the things I always say is that the young women that I've dealt with and that I've observed are very, very smart about their careers, but they're not always so smart about their love lives. And I think it's partly they didn't think they had to be. I think they were raised with the idea that the really difficult task of their 20s, pre-adulthood, was the career, and somehow this other stuff would just kind of happen.
But you know, it sort of, I thought it was the reverse of our generation. That we
Yes.
sort of,
Yes.
marriage was sort of happened. I mean, college was a great place to meet a guy. You tended to pair off during your college years. It was work and finding professional work that seemed to be the challenge and difficult, and how did you do that? And now, for this generation of women, it kind of flipped, and they knew how to navigate the world of professional, you know, internships, elite schools, and all the rest. But how in the world do you meet the right man to marry? This was a great puzzle.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to add, is just that this is something I saw over the summer when David and I were interviewing young adults on their views on relationships. And, you know, like my generation, we've been trained from the time we were young on how to succeed in school and in work. And we know the steps, we have a script for that. But there were so many young women. One in particular comes to mind who she was 28, and she had spent most of her 20s in a relationship with her, living with her boyfriend, and she had expected a ring, you know. She just thought that that was the next step, that's what happened. But then he broke up with her unexpectedly, and so she was 28, and she was successful in what she did, and as far as her career goes, but she was telling me, like, I don't know how to meet someone. She's like, when I was in college, there were guys all over the place, but her job was mostly women at her work, and she was thinking, you know, well, maybe online dating is the only thing I can do. So that was the route that she was going. But let's go back for a second, because when you were talking about the response to your book, Kay, I just want to talk about that anger for a minute. If you don't mind, I'm going to read a few quotes just so that you guys who haven't seen all the comments can get an idea of what we're talking about. And then I would love to hear your thoughts on what this anger is all about. So here are two of the most, they were the most recommended quotes, because you know, people can click on whether they like them or not. And so this one says, "Perhaps these young men have better things to do with their time than allow themselves to be tied to a whining, emotionally needy, greedy young woman. You do not need a woman to find happiness in this life. Stay smart and stay single. As for the women, let them visit a sperm bank if they want kids. Plenty of donors out there." And then this one, which had over 250 recommendations, said, "Why should the males of today grow up? To marry some overachieving harden and spend their days pushing a stroller to playdates at the park? Why would they when they can have a cold beer, an endless supply of available girlfriends, and the PlayStation? The patriarchy is dead. Nice work, girls. Now stop complaining." So if those were some of the most popular comments, it gives you an idea. So what is this anger about?
Yeah.
Okay, you touched on it
Yeah,
a little
well,
bit.
that's the kind of email I got after that Shaman of the Promised Land also. But so, you know, it's certainly not what I expected to hear. And we should step back a minute and say, all of the data suggests that most college-educated young people will marry. the large majority, somewhere around 80% is where we think we're at. So put that in the background. But let's talk about this group that's kind of angry here. I saw a number of things going on. One is a lot of men said, as I interviewed them, that they had been taught, grown up in homes and gone to school and been taught that women were their equal. We should have a really, we should be aspiring towards a gender-neutral society. Women could do anything a man could do, and you should treat women with that kind of respect, that they were very much like you and you're equal. So a lot of men said they tried that. And what they found is that women actually didn't want to be treated that way when it came to, at least it came to the dating life. In other words, there was one thing about the workplace, yes, they did want to be treated that way. But when it came to dating life, they seemed to turn away from nice guys. The complaint of the nice guy is a very, very common theme on the internet. You can find it, you just look at nice guys or something like that. You'll see it all over the place. And what the guys said is, we were told we were supposed to treat women this way, but that's not actually what they want. They always go for the jerks instead. And some of them became extremely bitter about it. I think also adding to the bitterness was the divorce culture. I think a lot of these guys grew up in homes where either maybe their father was treated badly, maybe an uncle or a friend. They saw being screwed in the courts and lost their family, their wives, and and a lot of their income, and thought, I'm not going to have that happen to me. I did hear a lot of that from young men, so that was there as well. So I think that, to conclude, I think what was going on is that because of the loss of the script, because nobody really knows how you're supposed to behave, unless you're very, very intuitive, you have a great deal of social skills, you're going to have trouble out there. There are guys who are negotiating this just fine. They're doing great, and they can find women there, either for dating or for a long relationship or even for marriage without too much difficulty. But there are a lot of guys who really don't get what you're supposed to be doing. They don't have the script. I remember, this is such an odd thing to remember, but when I was in high school, I remember there was a rumor that a boy that we all knew, my whole crowd knew, every time he called a girl, he had a 3x5 card in front of him, and he knew exactly what he was going to say to ask her out on a date. But how would you do that now? I mean, there is no script, so for a guy like that who couldn't figure it out, who didn't know, how to project a kind of confidence that women, frankly, do often respond to, doesn't have that. And a lot of the discussion now on the at least among men, is about these so-called beta guys. These are the guys who really can't, who have trouble with women, and they, I think, are the angriest.
If I could just add one thing, I think too that I've talked to some men who come up to me after I've talked about why there are no good men, left a few brave guys, and they'll say, I didn't want to get into this conversation. They're a little bit, they don't feel that they have much to contribute. And I think more generally in the sort of the disappearance of the classic romantic courtship, we've lost a lot of male initiative. And the initiative in many respects has shifted to the women. And I've written in the book about the female proposal. So that now the burden of a woman who's in a long-term dating relationship or cohabiting, her job is to try to determine his intentions and to say, well, the classic thing is, where's this relationship going? Or, when do you think, she sees her job as trying to turn a live-in boyfriend into husband material and to try to nudge him toward a commitment to marriage. And that's a complete, so men, I mean, their response is kind of just to resist. And the other thing is that when you have a ladder of commitment that leads you step by step dating, then you pair off as a couple, you're exclusive, then after a while you begin to introduce your boyfriend or girlfriend to family and friends, and then maybe later on you get engaged. You sort of know, where the relationship is headed. And if you decide it's not right, then you go down the ladder. But that doesn't exist anymore for either men or women. And so women are more commitment-minded at a younger age than men. And so the initiative, therefore, rests with them. And, it's a big change and a source of confusion.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I've seen with people that I know. And I don't know if you're familiar with the term DTR, but that's what we call it. It stands for define the relationship.
Oh, no.
And, and so, usually it's the woman who, maybe this guy is hanging out with her a lot and she has to say, I think we need to have a DTR. And then they'll talk about it. But yeah, I definitely have seen that. But let's talk about this idea of a script, because that is something that I saw in common with both of your books. So I thought that would be a good way to get at this question of whether or not delaying marriage is a problem. So just to start off with that, why does a script matter? Like, why is it so important to have one?
Well, I mean, I think I suggested one reason is that there's sort of, the historian Beth Bailey wrote a nice book about mid-century courtship. And she said at that time it was kind of a national system. And you could go along with it or you could reject it, rebel against it, but nearly everybody who was a teenager and young adult at that time knew what was prescribed for the man to do and what was prescribed for the woman to do. And so at the very least, though you could argue about whether this was a good or bad thing, it was clear. And it was easy to know, sort of how the relationship was progressing and to know what people's intentions were. Were we just good friends or was there something romantic? But, and I think that's one of the problems, because at least from the women's standpoint, the romantic despair and discontent comes from just not knowing. And in this great population of people looking for partners, how do you find other marriage-minded men? Because men, as you suggest, Kay, have all, someone a one-night stand, someone an long-term relationship, someone to just date, and it's just hard to know, how you pick out somebody who would even be interested in marriage. And there's a kind of script developing, I guess, through the internet, and DTR and LTRs and a kind of language, but I don't think it quite reaches the level of this very well elaborated cultural script that actually we had.
Yeah. What I would add to that is that the young men who are reaching dating and possibly even marriage age grew up at a time where what Barbara calls the Girl Project was really going strong. Girls were the focus of the socialization by both parents and schools. And I think that a lot of young men kind of stepped back a little bit and thought, well, I don't want to, I don't want to say anything. I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to be thinking about this. Some of the more feisty guys got nasty, like the ones who have been writing me, but a lot of guys got kind of passive and withdrawn, and they weren't really sure, well, how am I supposed to act? If I act too confident, then that'll be seen as being kind of macho or overly masculine, overly manly. If I act too hyper, they're gonna accuse me of being, somewhat misogynistic or something like that. And I keep quoting this blog post that I came across recently because it perfectly illustrates what I'm talking about here, the dilemma and the gap between men and women here. This was by a young woman on a dating website, very hip, young, media-centric, 20-something. And the title of the post was, ask me out on a damn date. And she went on and said, you know, don't ask me to hang out sometime. Don't ask me if you can tell me you're going to call on Friday and see what's up. Ask me out on a damn frigging date. And so, you know, it was so interesting to me because, you know, there's the problem in a nutshell. I mean, if you're equals, you know, why is that up to the guy? And a lot of guys say, hey, what's that about? Same thing with paying, you know, for dinner. You know, a lot of these, the most recent research says that young women, college-educated women, single, childless women, are making more than men. I'm talking about women in their 20s. So why, the guys say, well, huh? You know, why am I supposed to ask them out on a date and then pay for them? But the fact is that a lot of women, not all, but a lot of women still want that. So what you get, I think, is this confusion. You know, I heard from some people who said to me, oh, well, don't be ridiculous, you figured this out, and, you know. Well, some people do. If they find a niche, if they find a kind of subculture, a subgroup that is really very simpatico and they've all somehow reached some of the same conclusions, this stuff can be figured out. But for a lot of people, it's just a source of constant confusion.
Yeah, so why, I mean, I know that you both talk about this a lot in your book, in each of your books. Why has this changed? Why is this courtship script non-existent or so different than it used to be?
Well, I think one thing is what Kay said, this prolonged period of pre-adulthood.
Pre-adulthood, yes.
Where the focus for both men and women is to prepare themselves for the world of work and to get credentialed and on the path. I would also say that now with heavy loads of college debt, people are postponing any kind of long-term commitment, much less marriage, till they have a sense that they're financially stable, both men and women. And then I want to pick up on something Kay said, because I think it's really important, maybe not directly responsive to your question, but it is the impact of the divorce revolution on younger people and their ideas about dating and marriage. I wrote about divorce a long time ago, and my main idea was that it was hard on kids. That was the main idea. I never imagined that divorce would have such a long arm that stretched across generations. And I think it also figures in the Girl Project, because one of the reasons that that there's been a huge social investment in the education and progress and independence of women is to divorce-proof women, to armor them against the risk of divorce. And then there's the thing that you mentioned, Kay, which is the fear of divorce as a reason not to marry, but to live together or have, you know, sexual relationships or friendships or friends with benefits or whatever, but not to make that commitment for the reason that it could fail and be devastating, which isn't to say that when, you know, a 3-year relationship breaks up, that's pretty hard on women. But so divorce, even though along with the prolonged period of young adult life, I think helps explain some of it.
Let me add one other thing, and this is something I talk about quite a bit in the book, and that's the economic reasons for later marriage. And they're not the ones that are directly related to the Great Recession. But there has been a transformation in our economy so that we have what economists often refer to as the knowledge economy. Now, the knowledge economy is filled with jobs for people who think and analyze and calculate and communicate.
Leaves out the guys.
Well, I wasn't going to say that, but there's something to that. Okay, we can get to that if you'd like. But anyway, the point I wanted to make was that it takes a lot of education. So, you know, not only do you have to go to college, but you frequently need professional school or graduate school. The knowledge economy is also is a globalized economy, so you're frequently mobile. You need to be mobile. You need to be able to move around. You might take an internship here in Chicago and then have to move for a school or a job to New York or DC, and then they send you to London, or and in order to really take full advantage of this economy. And by the way, there are really a lot of great jobs to be had despite the misery of our current situation. And people know that. You have to put an awful lot of time and energy into that and really keep yourself free and unattached. So I can't emphasize enough how important that is to people's understanding of their 20s now. It's trying to negotiate this knowledge economy, it's trying to figure out where you fit into this. There are so many jobs out there that didn't exist even 10 years ago, much less 20 years ago, and parents are not in a great position even to advise their kids because so much of it is unfamiliar to us. And so a lot of young people find that they are kind of lost in particularly in their early mid-20s. There's this new phrase, the quarter life crisis, that some of you may have heard. I think it's really picking up on that idea that you're 25 and you're going, well, now what? Or what am I supposed to be doing? And who am I? So it turns into a period of not just job and career exploration, but also of self-exploration. And it's a necessary thing, I think, to have a lot of independence in order to move around this. And it used to be that a man could do that and wife would follow along. That's not going to happen anymore.
Could I say, Amber, one more thing about why the courtship script has changed? No institutions are particularly invested anymore in helping men and women meet each other for successful marriages. I mean, it used to be that families, because you married at a younger age, and I married a guy from my hometown, so my family got to meet him, and it was just normal that we'd go in and out of the house together, and our siblings would know each other. Well, that's gone because of prolonged young adulthood. Schools were a primary place for creating and supporting and institutional supports for dating, and then in college for finding a prospective mate. And clearly, colleges don't do that anymore. In fact, we now, in our neighborhood, the big problem with the college students is these parties of 500 people where they get drunk on Four Loko and start howling and screaming and carrying on into the night. So. And these are kids who live off campus. So the schools are no longer involved in any way in sort of the social life of students. And then religious institutions try, but again, because the tendency is for young adults to be estranged, especially young men, from their religious institutions. They don't have the kind of influence that they once had. And that's a big thing, just losing that kind of institutional support for the script.
Although, I was surprised when I was first starting to work on this material. I gave a talk at a organization, it was a Christian organization, and I was telling them a little about my research. And I was shocked to find out how much they were finding the same issue going on among fundamental, evangelicals as well. So this is not just a secular issue. One of the things about pre-adulthood that makes it sort of slightly problematic in relation to more than slightly, problematic in relation to civil society is that you are very autonomous during this decade or more, and you don't have these connections, not just to religious organizations, but to schools or to neighborhoods. And it's not surprising to hear that pre-adults don't vote very much. They do some volunteering, but they're not civically engaged there because they're simply not rooted anywhere.
And the workplace, of course, discourages, at least some workplaces, romantic interactions. So.
Yeah, I agree that that's definitely what I see widespread. And it is interesting, though, because I have a little bit of a different perspective, at least as far as religious institutions go, because I was just talking to a friend who's graduating this year from Ohio State, and she is an evangelical Christian, and she was telling me she has 11 weddings to go to this summer, and almost all of them are people who are just graduating. And I know at the school I went to, it was similar. I mean, there were quite a few people who got married afterwards, so there is this little group that's holding on. But for the most part, I do see, you know, career development and 20s being mutually exclusive with marriage in people's minds. I mean, I have a quote actually from a woman that I interviewed this summer, and she said, in your 20s, you are the focus, and when you're newly married, your spouse has to be the focus. You can't be so selfish, you know, it's just that kind of logic. So I do see that. I did want to read something and have you guys respond so that we can get into the question about whether or not this is a problem before we open it up to questions for the audience. So I found this book review of a book called Not Quite Adults by sociologists Richard Sederston and Barbara Ray. And they're kind of arguing that, yes, young adults are pushing back these traditional milestones of adulthood, but actually there's all these financial benefits to this, and they kind of are skeptical of people who, the way they put it is, they question the frequent hand-wringing about the death of marriage because they say, oh, well, that helps people earn degrees, and that's important. So, you know, how would you respond to that? Is it a problem that young adults are delaying marriage, or is this just an interesting trend?
Well, as Kay said, and I agree, and we both wrote about, for college-educated people, that's a reasonable case to make, because despite all the trials and tribulations, they have a much higher success rate. But it is a very big problem, as you and David know, for the non-college educated majority of young people in the country. This, you know, this inability to find a suitable mate in marriage and some of the consequences that go along with that. And so in some ways, when we talk about our own college graduates, kids in our own families, we may be only telling part of the story, but the other part of the story could be grimmer, actually, than the one that we're telling here today.
Should we focus at all then on, I mean, are there negative consequences then for college educated?
Well, my main thing in talking to women, and again, these were women who were 5 to 10 years out of college, is, yeah, I mean, when you have 3 or 4 serious relationships in your 20s and they all end badly, each successive relationship makes you more suspicious, leery, bruised, wary, and, you know, I think does create more conflict, less good. I mean, I hear from women some of the things about bad things about men. So, I mean, I think it does add to a sort of gender conflict, mistrust.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, this also starts to answer your question of, is it a problem? Mm-hmm. You know, as we said before, if you look at the data, it suggests that most of these people are going to work it out. However, you know, after doing the book, after working on the research, I came to the conclusion that it doesn't look so good in the future, and we do need to be alert to this. Because of this, the disappointments, the frustration, the sense that that some women have, that there are no good men left, that there has been an increase in the number of women, single educated women who are having children alone. It's a very small number, right? At this point, I think it's obviously going to go up. You know, it's become much more of a acceptable. You know, it used to be like, you know, so radical and dramatic. I mean, couldn't believe people did that. Now it's becoming, well, an option increasingly. And I hear from a lot of women who are freezing their eggs, which, you know, because most of them would like to find somebody to settle down with. So my prediction is we are going to see more single mothers, educated mothers. How fast that'll go up, I don't know. That we'll see also a larger number of women who would like to be married, who stay single. and an increasing number of men who are disconnected from family life. That's also something I think we need to be worried about. However, that said, if we really want to talk about a big social problem, this is not it. The biggest social problem is the one affecting people with less than a college education, and that's where we're really seeing dramatic breakdown in the family, and the effect on children is dramatic. And when you combine that family breakdown with a knowledge economy, where you really have to get that education to get ahead, you've got a real, you've got a situation, what I call marriage and caste in America. You've got a caste system where the educated folks produce educated kids who become educated adults, and they marry, and so on and so forth. But on the other end, you see something quite the opposite. People who either don't marry, have children outside of marriage, or end up divorcing. Those children do not get the resources that the higher educated people are getting, not just because they have more money, but because they are able to be more child-centered in terms of making sure that the education really takes off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And so while it might not be as big of a social problem for the college-educated, I thought you made a good point, Barbara, about gender mistrust, because I know this is a conversation that I've had recently just with friends who have noticed that is becoming, it seems to be becoming more of a problem, and obviously that's not a good foundation for a good relationship. So yeah, so that's interesting. And the other thing is, a few weeks ago my sister was visiting. She's a senior in high school, and one of her friends came too. They were on spring break. And I was asking her, what are the girls who are graduating in your class, what are their plans? And most of them were going to college, and a few of them said things like, oh, I just want to get married and have kids, but they were still going to college. And but my sister's friend, she said, well, she's really smart. She's a National Merit Scholar. She wants to become a neurosurgeon, is what she said, and she just is very driven career-wise. But she also wants to have a family, and she said to me, she said, yeah, I'm going to go to school to become a neurosurgeon, so I'll probably be one of those women that's 30, single, lonely, wants a family, but doesn't have one. And I just thought, that's so sad. How can we, even if this isn't a huge social problem, for the individuals who are dealing with this confusion and who are searching for a mate and don't really know quite how to do it, and even if they eventually find someone during that period of your 20s, it can be tough. It's not necessarily as glamorous as people like to make your 20s sound. And so how can we develop some kind of courtship script or what have you to help college-educated people navigate career development, education, but also their dream to achieve their dreams for romance and for family life?
I noticed that both of our books are a little light on prescription. But I think that's good, because one wouldn't want to be glib about it. These are cultural productions. You can't just snap your fingers and order up a new courtship script. That isn't the way it happens. You can't pass public policies that will make people get married in wonderful ways. So I'm not sure. I mean, maybe the answers will come more from you and your generation.
Well, I know one thing you had said in your book was just talking about these innovations, the need for both in the marketplace and the larger society to come up with ways for this to work.
And I think read our books, because it was like the women I interviewed who were highly accomplished women. This was like they were in first grade. They really didn't know anything. They just weren't aware that the terrain had shifted, that things had changed as a consequence of other changes. So if there would just be more mindfulness about just a greater sense of both the challenges and, you know, ways to do it better, I think that would at least be a starting point.
Yeah, I would just add to that that a lot of these major economic and cultural changes we're talking about, they're not going away. The knowledge economy is here to stay. The later marriage is here to stay. But I do think that we can be a little smarter, and young people in particular can be a little smarter about how to negotiate that time. It's, you know, it's not a matter of reviving an old script. You know, that's not going to happen, and I'm not sure it should. But there should be more awareness. I guess Barbara and I agreed that we like to imagine that if you just talk to people, they'll understand it, and then they'll behave better. But I don't know whether that's true. But you know, I always come back to that. You know, there does need to be more understanding about what has changed. I was amazed, actually. Somebody happened to arrange a meeting for me with a editor at Glamour, and I was telling her about my book and what the thesis was, and she said, "Well, everybody knows all that." And I thought, I don't think so. So I don't know. There's an assumption that they do understand it among some people. But when you start to talk about it, I've noticed certainly from particularly young women bloggers, just a real lack of understanding, even when they read about it. They don't get it.
Yeah. Here's a funny thing, just an anecdote, but among the professoriate, college, my husband teaches writing, and so he meets with his students on a regular basis, and they talk about an essay, and sometimes they can be personal essays or essays on, and he does a lot of counseling. Yeah. He talks to people about their problems, and so I'm not sure that's I mean, you know, he's careful, he's not trained, he doesn't give, you know, psychological advice, but it is I wonder if somehow, you know, there might be resources. For so long, in my experience, there was so much emphasis on, you know, not talking about marriage to college students, that it betrayed a lack of ambition and a retreat from even teaching courses on marriage in sociology classes. So there might be a little bit of work that could be done there as well.
Right. There is a taboo, I think, among in certain in certain circles about talking about marriage when in the early or mid-20s. And I've certainly noticed in response to my book, and I'll bet you saw this too, Barbara, that they think they get uncomfortable, like, oh, that's a little weird to be thinking so much about marriage. What's her hang-up, you know? Mm-hmm. And when you point out that all the surveys show that this is a major life aspiration for almost everybody, or at least 80% according to the surveys, there's no response to that. But the point is, it's still seen as sort of uncool, anti-feminist, mm-hmm. I guess. And something that they don't really want to get into with mm-hmm. you.
Yeah, and parents don't seem to want to talk about it
right.
either.
That's right.
I've had friends who are just terrified to tell their parents that they're thinking about the subject of marriage with their boyfriend. But well, let's go ahead and open it up to questions.